The room was cold, its walls filled with echoes of silence that felt suffocating, as though the very air held its breath. Everything around her felt distant, almost unreal. The grand chandelier above glimmered faintly, casting soft shadows that danced across the marble floor, but none of it mattered. None of it reached her. Her hand throbbed, the pain radiating like fire through her small wrist. It wasn't just the physical hurt that kept her frozen in place, though. It was the weight of everything else. She stood there, staring at the note in her hand, her fingers trembling as she clutched it tightly. The paper was crumpled, but those words had already seared themselves into her memory. "You're nothing without him. If he finds out, it's over." The words burned through her thoughts, spinning them into confusion and fear. What was this? What did it mean? She didn't understand. Her young mind could barely make sense of the cryptic warning, but the way it had been slipped into her hands with such urgency, it felt real. It felt like something big was happening, and she was right in the middle of it. Caught between forces she didn't understand, tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry, not now. She was already weak from the pain, from everything that had happened. The only thing she knew was that she had to hold on to the note. She had to keep it safe. Just as she was about to crumple the paper again, the door to the room creaked open. Her heart leaped into her throat, the sudden noise sending a jolt of panic through her veins. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel the presence, the heavy footsteps that had been a part of her life since before she could remember. Her father. He was always there, always present, yet somehow always distant. He had built his empire from nothing, and his wealth and status were undeniable. But his emotions, they were never so simple. She could count on one hand the number of times she had seen him truly vulnerable, truly shaken. And now, he was rushing toward her, his face pale, his eyes wide with alarm. His usual confidence had faded, replaced by a look she had never seen before. "Where is she?" His voice was sharp, filled with an edge of panic that didn't belong. He didn't ask her directly, but his eyes scanned the room as if searching for something, someone. The girl remained frozen. She didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. All she could feel was the ache in her hand, the cold weight of the note, and the look in her father's eyes. The same look he wore whenever he feared something outside of his control. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice breaking through the thick silence, barely audible. Her father turned quickly, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of concern and confusion. He took a step toward her, but she flinched back instinctively, as if his very presence made the pain in her hand worse. "Baby, what happened?" His voice softened, a slight tremor beneath his words. He took another step, this time slower. "Careful, let me see your hand." She hesitated, the note still clenched tightly in her fist. He was so close now, close enough to see the fear in her eyes, the way her breath hitched every time he moved. She paused, struggling to find the words. "I don't know what's happening, Daddy, please." Her father's expression shifted, his confusion deepening. He took her hand gently, but his eyes flickered to the crumpled note she was still holding. There was a flicker of something like recognition, or maybe even dread before he carefully pried the note from her fingers. She watched him, her heart pounding as he unfolded it. The silence between them stretched, heavy and thick, as if the very air knew that whatever came next would change everything. He read the note quickly, his face growing colder with each passing second. Then, without a word, he crushed it in his hand, his jaw tightening as though he were trying to hold back something dangerous. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low but filled with authority. "Who gave you this?" I don't know," she stammered, the words escaping her as if they were caught in her throat. Someone just gave it to me." Her father stared at her for a moment, his gaze unblinking. He wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper, but there was something in her eyes, something that told him not to push any further. "Not yet. Listen to me," he said, his voice steadying, but the tension in his words was clear. "We're going to get through this. I'm here, okay? Whatever this is, we'll handle it, together." But the reassurance didn't reach her. She could see the way his eyes darted around the room, as though he was already calculating his next move, already thinking about how to fix this. The girl didn't want fixing. She wanted answers, she wanted truth, and she wanted to know why her father, the man who could buy anything, could fix anything, couldn't seem to fix the one thing that mattered most, her pain. Before she could say anything, The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow and deliberate. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Her father's gaze snapped to the door, his expression hardening, like a man who had just realized the walls were closing in around him. A woman's voice, composed, floated through the door, though her words were not meant for the girl. "We need to talk," she said. Her father stiffened, his grip tightening on the girl's hand. He didn't answer immediately, as though buying time. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back to his daughter. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice sharp and final. "Don't move." She wanted to argue. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't, not with the fear clawing at her throat, not with the uncertainty that gripped her heart. Her father turned and walked toward the door, his expression unreadable, leaving her standing there, alone with nothing but the note and her broken heart. And just as she thought the world couldn't get any darker, the woman's voice spoke again, just beyond the door. "It's worse than we thought." Her father's response was the last thing she heard before the door slammed shut, and in that moment, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The girl stood alone in the cold room, her father's footsteps fading as he walked away, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. She felt as though she was suspended in time, caught between a moment that no longer made sense and a future that seemed terrifyingly uncertain. The pain in her hand, now ignored, pulsed through her body, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. The note she had held in her trembling hand haunted her still. Those cryptic words, filled with warning and threat, rattled in her mind. "You're nothing without him. If he finds out, it's over." Who had given it to her? What was it meant to mean? She couldn't answer those questions, but she knew, deep down, that her life had just taken a dangerous turn. Her father's sudden panic, his rushing to her side, his unreadable expression when he read the note, all of it pointed to something far bigger than she could understand. The note was a warning. She was sure of it, but from who, and for what? A chill swept through the room, the cold air sinking deep into her bones. The girl hugged her arms around her small body, seeking warmth, though the icy grip of fear held her tighter than any physical chill could. She wanted to scream, to cry out, but she was alone now, her father gone, and the house felt empty in a way it never had before. She couldn't help but feel that this emptiness was something she would never be able to escape. The woman's voice from beyond the door still echoed in her ears, and she wondered who she was. Why had her father reacted the way he had when he heard her speak? The girl had never seen him so unnerved before. He was a man used to control, a man who made deals that shaped entire industries, but now, he was afraid, and that frightened her more than anything else. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind turning over the possibilities. She remembered the way her father had looked at her just before he left, as if there was something more to it all, something hidden from her. She felt it too. There was something dark in the air now, something she couldn't ignore, and she knew, deep inside, that whatever was happening, she was at the center of it. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. She lost track of time, lost in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. But then, the sound of voices reached her ears, whispers at first, but soon louder. Her heart skipped a beat as she heard the woman speak again. "We can't keep hiding this. He's too close now." The girl's pulse quickened. The woman's words pierced through her like a needle. But what did she mean? Hiding what? Who was too close? Was it her father they were talking about? She rose from the bed, her legs unsteady beneath her. She had to know what was going on. She had to find out the truth. Her hands were shaking, but she ignored them as she crept toward the door, pressing her ear to the cool wood. The conversation beyond was muffled, but the tension in the voices was unmistakable. "Do you think he suspects?" a man's voice asked, low and careful. "I don't know," the woman replied, "but we can't afford to let him find out. Not now." There was a long pause, a silence that stretched on too long. The girl held her breath, heart pounding in her chest. What were they talking about? What was so dangerous that her father had to be protected from it? "We have to act fast," the woman continued. "He's too important. We can't risk him knowing the truth." The truth. The word echoed in the girl's mind like a hammer strike. What truth? What had her father been hiding from her all these years? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Approaching, the door handle turned, and the girl scrambled back, her heart leaping into her throat. She didn't know what to do, what to say. But then the door opened, and her father stepped inside. His expression was even more grim than before. His jaw clenched tightly as if he were holding something back. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, looking at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't read. Was it fear? Regret? Something worse? "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice rough, as though the words were hard to get out. The girl nodded, though she wasn't sure she could trust her own voice. She didn't know how to respond. There was so much she wanted to say, but she didn't know where to start. How could she ask him about the things she had overheard? How could she confront him with the fact that she knew something was wrong? Her father's eyes flickered to the crumpled note still in her hand. He reached out slowly, almost hesitantly, and took it from her. The moment his fingers touched the paper, a shudder passed through him, and the girl could see the weight of whatever he was carrying. It was like he had been expecting this moment, but still wasn't ready for it. "Do you know what this is?" he asked quietly, holding the note between his fingers as if it were a dangerous weapon. The girl shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand. Daddy, what's happening?" Her father's face hardened. He sighed heavily, as though the truth was a burden too heavy to bear. Then, with a long pause, he spoke the words that would change everything. "It's about your mother," he said, his voice cold, distant. "There's something you don't know. Something I should have told you long ago." The girl felt a rush of confusion and fear. Her mother, she had been gone for years. What could there be to know now? "You've always been told she died in an accident," he continued, his words clipped, measured. "But that's not the truth." The room seemed to spin, the ground beneath her feet threatening to give way. Her mother? What about her mother? What was he saying? "Daddy, what are you talking about?" she demanded, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "What happened to her? What aren't you telling me?" He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't want to burden you with this, but it's time you knew. Your mother was never who she seemed. There are people, dangerous people, who want to control everything I've built. And your mother, ... She was a part of it." The girl felt her stomach drop. Her mother had always been a mystery, someone who had vanished from her life with little explanation. But this was something else entirely. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her father's face twisted with pain. "I'll explain everything, but not now. Not here. There are people listening, people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. They'll come for you, for both of us, if we don't act quickly." Her heart raced. The note, the conversation, her father's secrecy, it was all beginning to fit together in a way that terrified her. There was a war, a battle being fought behind closed doors, and she was at the center of it. The truth was more dangerous than she could have imagined. "You're not safe here," her father said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to leave, now." Her world had just been turned upside down, and nothing would ever be the same again. Girl felt like the walls were closing in on her, the air growing thicker with every passing second. Her father's words had hit her like a blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of her. Her mother, the woman she had always been told was gone, in an accident, was somehow involved in something far darker, something that involved her father's empire. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. It was too much to process, too much to understand. Her father's urgency snapped her back to the present. "We don't have time to waste. They're coming for us. You need to pack, and we need to leave. Now." His voice was firm, but the panic in his eyes told a different story. The girl didn't question him. She couldn't. Her instincts screamed at her to trust him, to follow him, but fear was clawing at her from the inside out. She didn't know who they were, or why they were after her, but she knew one thing: she had to get out. She nodded, silently, her body moving on its own as she quickly walked over to her closet. Her hands moved mechanically, pulling clothes from the shelves and throwing them into a bag. Her mind was spinning, her thoughts racing in 1,000 different directions. She was numb, too overwhelmed by the whirlwind of revelations to think straight, but she couldn't afford to waste time. Her father's warning echoed in her ears. "We need to leave, now." Her father paced the room, his movements sharp and purposeful. He didn't look at her as she packed, his eyes scanning the room, like a man searching for something hidden, something important. His every action seemed deliberate, calculated, as if he were preparing for an enemy that could strike at any moment. "I don't understand," the girl said, her voice trembling. "What are we running from? Who are they?" Her father turned to her, his face taut with strain. "You don't know the whole story." "Not yet, but I'll explain everything. Just not now. Right now. The only thing that matters is getting you Safe, we'll talk when we're away from here, when we're not being watched. The girl's heart raced as she stuffed more clothes into her bag, her hands shaking. She wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but she knew now was not the time. There would be no answers here. She had to survive this first. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a trap. The air seemed thick with hidden dangers, with things lurking just beyond her line of sight. The girl glanced toward the window, but she couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. The grounds were quiet, the sprawling lawns stretching out into the distance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. Something was coming. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Hurry, sweetheart. We don't have much time." She nodded, pushing herself harder to pack, to get everything ready. Every second felt like an eternity. She felt the weight of her father's eyes on her as she moved, but he didn't say anything more. He was waiting, watching. When she was finished, she turned to him, clutching the bag tightly in her hands. He was already at the door, his hand on the handle, his eyes scanning the hallway. The tension between them was thick, but there was something else in his gaze now, something almost resigned, as though he knew there was no going back. "Come on," he said, his voice low. "Stay close to me." The girl followed him down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Her steps were fast but careful, as though she were trying to move through the house without making a sound. The silence was deafening. The only noise, the soft shuffle of their footsteps on the hardwood floors. They reached the staircase, and the girl's gaze flickered to the front door. The massive wooden structure stood tall, its heavy frame blocking the view of the outside world. She wanted to look, to see if there was anything waiting for them out there. But her father stopped her with a sharp look. "No, don't look," he whispered urgently. "We can't take any chances." She didn't question him. She couldn't. They moved quickly down the stairs and through the foyer, past the grand piano and the expensive art that decorated the walls. The girl's chest tightened as she reached the front door. She felt exposed, vulnerable. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Her father was supposed to keep her safe. He was supposed to be the one who protected her from everything. But now, she was running from something she didn't even understand, and she was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her life. Her father pulled open the door, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. The girl hesitated for a moment, looking back over her shoulder at the house. It seemed so ordinary, so deceptively safe, but she knew better now. There was nothing safe about it anymore. "Come on," her father urged, his hand gripping her arm gently but firmly. "We need to go." She nodded, feeling a surge of fear mixed with a strange sense of determination. Whatever was happening, whatever truth her father had been hiding, she would face it. She had to. She had no choice. They stepped out into the night, and the door slammed shut behind them with a resounding thud. The girl felt a strange sense of finality in that moment, as if she were leaving behind everything she had ever known. But there was no time to look back. Her father led her down the stone path, his pace quick and urgent. They reached the driveway, where a black car was parked, its engine already running. The headlights cast long shadows on the ground, and the girl could see the outline of a figure sitting inside. "Get in," her father ordered, his voice tight. She didn't ask questions. She climbed into the back seat, her father following close behind. As soon as the door slammed shut, the car sped off, its tires squealing as it tore down the driveway and onto the main road. The girl pressed herself against the seat, her mind racing. They were leaving everything behind. The mansion, the life she had known, the people she thought she could trust. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she didn't. Not yet. The car hummed down the road, cutting through the night, and the girl couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her father's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. His expression was grim, but there was something else in his eyes, something that terrified her even more than the silence. "We're going to find the truth," he said quietly, "and we're going to make sure no one can hurt us again." The girl nodded slowly, her heart heavy with dread. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. The car sped down the empty highway, the darkness outside stretching endlessly as they raced toward an unknown destination. The girl sat in the back seat, her hands clutching the strap of her bag, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Her father had kept her in the dark for so long, but now everything was coming to light. The lies, the secrecy, the sudden danger, it all seemed to crash down on her at once, leaving her gasping for air. Her father's eyes never left the road, his jaw set in a hard line as he drove. He wasn't looking at her, but she could feel his tension, the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him. The girl didn't know what to say. How could she? How could she ask him about the things he had hidden from her for so long? The truth about her mother, the note, the danger that seemed to be following them. None of it made sense, and she didn't know where to begin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, she spoke. "Daddy, what are we running from?" Her voice was quiet, trembling, but the words were out before she could stop them. She needed to know. She couldn't keep running without understanding why. "Who's chasing us?" Her father's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white. He didn't answer immediately, and the girl could feel the weight of his hesitation in the air. She waited, hoping that he would finally give her the answers she so desperately needed. "It's not just about you," he said, his voice low, almost too soft to hear over the hum of the car's engine. "It's about everything I've built, the people who want to destroy it all. They want control, and they'll do anything to get it." The girl's heart began to race. Control. What did that mean? What did it have to do with her mother, with the life she had thought she knew? "Who are they?" she pressed. "What do they want with us?" Her father glanced at her for the first time since they had left the house. His eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite place by in regret, fear, maybe all three. He looked away quickly, as though he couldn't bear to meet her gaze for long. "It's complicated," he said finally, "but I'll tell you everything. I owe you that much." The girl didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her thoughts swirling with confusion and fear. The car continued to speed down the highway, the lights of distant towns flickering in the distance, but all she could think about was the man sitting beside her, the father she had trusted her entire life, now a stranger in a way. His secrets, his lies, they were all coming to the surface, and she didn't know how to handle it. The minutes ticked by, each one dragging her deeper into the unknown. But then, without warning, her father spoke again. "When your mother and I first met, I was a different man," he began, his voice distant as though he was speaking to himself. "I wasn't the man you know today. I didn't have the empire, the wealth, the influence. I was just a young man trying to make something of himself." The girl listened in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never heard her father speak like this before. There was a vulnerability in his voice that she hadn't known existed. "We met under unusual circumstances," he continued, his voice tightening. "She was already involved with dangerous people, people who had their own plans, their own ambitions. I didn't know it at the time, but I got caught up in it. She was involved with them, and I was too blinded by love to see the truth. She got deeper into it all, and I was too far in to get out. She had secrets, and I didn't even know half of them. It wasn't until after you were born that I realized just how deep it went." The girl's mind was spinning. Her mother, the woman she had always thought was a victim of fate, was involved with dangerous people. She couldn't wrap her head around it. She had always thought of her mother as someone who had been taken from her, someone who had been the innocent victim of an accident. But now it seemed like her mother had been part of something far darker. "I tried to get her out of it," her father said, his voice raw with emotion. "I tried to protect you, to give you a better life. But the people she was involved with, they wouldn't let her go. And when you were just a baby, she disappeared, vanished without a trace. I thought she was dead. I thought she had been taken from us. But the truth is, she was never really gone." The girl's breath caught in her throat. What was he saying? Was her mother alive? Her father's grip on the steering wheel tightened once again, his knuckles turning white. "She faked her death, and she left me to clean up the mess. She left me with the consequences of her actions. And now those people are coming for us, for you. They want something from me, something I won't give them, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." The girl's world was crashing down around her. Her mother, the woman she had mourned, the woman she had thought was lost forever, was alive, and she had faked her death. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. But as her father spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. "What do they want from you?" she whispered, her voice shaky. Her father's face hardened, and for a moment, she saw the man he had become, the man who had built his empire from nothing, the man who had fought his entire life to protect what was his. "They want control of everything I've worked for," he said, his voice steady, but the edge of danger in his words was unmistakable. "They want to tear everything down, and they want to take what's mine. But I won't let them. I won't let them take you. 2. The girl's mind was reeling. The people her father was talking about, they were powerful, dangerous, and now, they were after her. They had come for her before, through the note, through the threat, and now, it seemed, they were closing in. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her father glanced at her one last time before turning his attention back to the road. His face was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes now, a fire that told her he wasn't going down without a fight. "We're going to fight back," he said, "and we're going to make sure they regret ever coming after us." The girl didn't know what to feel. Fear, confusion, anger, all of it bubbled up inside her. But beneath it all, she felt something else's determination, a need to stand up, to fight, just as her father was. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. As the car sped into the night, the girl knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again, and whatever was coming next, she was going to face it. She had to. There was no other choice. The night seemed to stretch on forever as the car continued its relentless journey into the unknown. The girl sat in the back seat, her mind still processing the horrifying revelations her father had shared. Her mother, the woman she had always mourned, wasn't dead. She had faked her death, abandoned them both, and left her father to battle with the very people who had once been part of their lives. Her world, the one she had known, had shattered, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. The truth about her mother was the final blow to her fragile sense of stability. She had spent so many years believing that her mother was the victim, the innocent party in the cruel twist of fate that had taken her from their family. But now she was a part of something far darker, a secret she had kept from her daughter and her husband for years. Her father glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression dark and distant. He was driving with purpose, each movement quick and efficient. He hadn't said much since their last conversation. The tension in the car was palpable, thick with unspoken words and emotions neither of them could express. The girl couldn't stand the silence anymore. She needed to know more, needed to understand the full scope of what they were up against. She had to hear it from her father, to hear the truth, the unfiltered truth. She had already learned more than she had ever wanted to know, but she wasn't done yet, not until she understood everything. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "Who's after us, and why?" Her father's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but he didn't answer immediately. He focused on the road, as though buying time, but she could see the toll it was taking on him. He was exhausted, drained by the weight of everything he had kept hidden for so long. "There are people who will stop at nothing to get what they want," he said at last, his voice steady but filled with an edge she hadn't heard before. "I've built an empire, and they want control of it. They've been after me for years, but now, they've set their sights on you. You're the key to everything, whether you know it or not." The girl's heart raced as she processed his words. Her father's empire. How could she possibly be the key to everything? She was just a girl, caught in the middle of a game she didn't even understand. The realization hit her like a slap to the face. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How can I be the key? What do they want with me?" Her father glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting hers with a sorrow she couldn't place. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound of tires screeching broke through the night. The car swerved sharply, and the girl's heart leaped into her throat as the world seemed to tilt around them. "What's happening?" she gasped, clutching the seat in panic. Her father's face was set in a hard, determined expression as he fought to regain control of the car. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, pushing the vehicle forward with increased speed. "They found us," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "They've been tracking us. Hold on." The girl's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he meant. The danger wasn't just an abstract threat anymore. It was real. They were here. The people who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, had found them. The car surged forward, the headlights cutting through the darkness as her father sped through the winding roads. The girl glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of pursuing vehicles echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. She could hear the engines revving, the screech of tires against the pavement. Her father's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as he gritted his teeth, his focus entirely on the road ahead. He wasn't panicking, he was preparing. But the girl could feel the tension building in the car, could feel the impending danger closing in on them. "Get ready," he said, his voice low and steady. "This isn't over yet." The girl could only nod, her mind racing. She had no idea what was coming, but she could feel it in her bones. This was the moment when everything would change, when the fight for survival would begin. Car sped through the dark night, the headlights blinding against the inky blackness that surrounded them. Her father's movements were precise, calculated, as he took sharp turns, pushing the car to its limits. The sound of the pursuing vehicles grew louder, closer. She could feel the weight of their chase, the threat of what was to come, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. Instead, she focused on the road ahead, on the man who had always been her protector, her father, who now seemed to be a man prepared for a battle he never wanted, but had no choice but to face. And then, in a blink, it happened. The world seemed to explode in a flash of headlights, the screech of tires, and the sound of metal crashing against metal. Her father jerked the wheel sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision with a black SUV that had come. Out of nowhere, the girl's heart skipped a beat as the car swerved dangerously, spinning out of control. "Hold on," her father shouted as the car veered off the road, the tires skidding across the gravel. The girl's breath caught in her throat as the car slammed into a ditch, the impact jarring her entire body. The world tilted again, spinning wildly, before the car came to a sudden halt. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The car sat motionless in the ditch, the engine still running, the headlights casting an eerie glow in the dark night. The girl's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to collect herself, to make sense of what had just happened. She looked at her father, who was staring straight ahead, his face pale but determined. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice grim. "We need to move. Now." Before she could say anything, the sound of doors slamming shut reached her ears. The girl's heart skipped a beat as she realized that they weren't alone. The people who had been chasing them had caught up. They were here, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. Her father didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her out of the car, guiding her through the darkness. The cold night air bit at her skin, and her breath came in ragged gasps as they stumbled into the underbrush, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. The girl could hear the crunch of footsteps, the heavy breathing of their pursuers. Her father pushed her ahead of him, his voice low and urgent. "Go, don't look back, keep running." The girl didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She could feel the danger closing in around them, and all that mattered now was survival. They ran through the dense trees, across the rough terrain, the girl's legs burning with effort as she pushed herself harder, faster. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind them, but she didn't look. She couldn't afford to look back. All she could do was keep moving. Her father was ahead of her, his pace steady and unwavering. She could hear him breathing heavily, but there was no fear in his steps. He was determined. They both were. They had no choice. And then, without warning, there was a sudden crack, a gunshot that rang out in the night. The girl's heart skipped a beat as she heard the bullet whiz past her, too close for comfort. Her father didn't flinch. He kept running, his face set in a hard line. "We're almost there," he shouted over his shoulder. "Keep moving." The girl's legs felt like they were made of lead, but she pushed herself harder. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when everything depended on this moment. They had to escape. They had to survive. But the footsteps behind them were getting closer. They were closing in, and there was no way to outrun them forever. And then, just as the girl thought she couldn't take another step, she saw it. A light in the distance, a flicker of hope. Her father saw it too. "Run," he shouted, "to the light." The girl's heart leaped as they ran toward the light, her father's hand gripping hers tightly. The light grew brighter, and she knew that it was their only chance. They had to make it. They had to survive. As they neared the light, the girl didn't look back. She couldn't, but she knew, deep down, that the fight was far from over. The danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The light ahead of them grew brighter, casting long shadows as they sprinted through the dense underbrush. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, her legs burning with every step. The sound of pursuing footsteps grew louder, closer, a constant reminder that their escape was far from certain. Every breath she took felt like it might be her last, the air thick with fear and urgency. But her father's grip on her hand never wavered, and she clung to that as they ran. The light ahead was their salvation. It wasn't much, just a flicker in the distance, but it was enough. It promised safety, a place where they could regroup, where they could make their stand. The girl's mind raced, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, blurring her thoughts. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. They broke through the last of the trees and emerged into a clearing. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood a small cabin, its windows glowing warmly against the dark night. The light they had been running toward was coming from inside. Her father pulled her toward the cabin, his pace never slowing, his expression set in determination. The footsteps behind them were growing louder still, and she could hear the voices now. They were close, too close. Her father reached the door and slammed it open, pulling her inside just as the sound of gunfire echoed through the night. The door swung shut behind them with a heavy thud, and the girl found herself in a small, dimly lit room. Her father's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, his face a mask of determination. "Stay here," he said in a low, urgent voice, his eyes scanning the room. "Don't move, don't make a sound." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't know what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before, and the reality of what was happening was starting to sink in. Her father wasn't just running from some anonymous enemy, he was fighting for his life, and now, for hers. Her father moved quickly, taking up a position near the window, his gaze fixed on the approaching threat. He grabbed a rifle from a nearby table and checked it with swift, practiced movements. The girl watched him, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She wanted to ask him what was going on, what they were running from, but she knew better. There was no time for questions. "Don't worry," her father said, his voice calm despite the storm of chaos around them. "We'll get through this." The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, then stopped. The girl held her breath, her eyes darting to the window where her father stood. His eyes narrowed as he peered through the blinds. For a moment, there was only silence, the world outside frozen in time, and then, a voice. "Come out, Hansen." The voice called, a deep, cold tone that sent a shiver down the girl's spine. "We know you're in there. We know you've got what we want, and we're not leaving without it." Her father's grip tightened on the rifle, but he didn't move, he didn't speak. He just watched the window, his face betraying no emotion. The girl didn't know who they were. She didn't know what they wanted, but she knew this. They were here for her father, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Her father had said it before, these people would do anything, and now, they had caught up with them. "Give it to us, Hansen." The voice continued, louder now, closer. "Or we'll make sure you regret it." Her father's jaw clenched, and the girl saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, regret, fear. But beneath it all, there was a sense of calm, a deadly focus. This was the moment when he would either protect everything he had built, or lose it all. The door to the cabin creaked, and the girl's heart skipped a beat. Her father raised the rifle, his stance steady. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice low and firm. The girl dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she pressed herself against the floor. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she could feel the weight of it in her bones. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then the door burst open. The girl gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. The men who rushed inside were clad in black, their faces obscured by masks, their weapons drawn. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of resistance. Her father didn't flinch. He raised the rifle, and in one fluid motion, he fired. The shot rang out, loud and deafening, in the small cabin. One of the men dropped to the ground, his weapon clattering to the floor beside him. The others reacted instantly, their guns raising, but her father was faster. He fired again, and another man went down, his body crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. The girl could hardly breathe. Her father was fighting them, but she couldn't watch. She couldn't bear to see him in danger, but she couldn't tear her eyes away either. He was protecting them. He was fighting for their survival. The remaining men ducked behind the furniture, returning fire, their shots ricocheting off the walls and floor. The cabin became a war zone, the sound of gunfire echoing through the small space. The girl covered her ears, her heart racing as she heard the chaos unfolding around her. Her father's voice cut through the noise, calm and commanding. "Stay down, stay hidden." The girl nodded, her body shaking, but she didn't dare move. She had to trust him. She had to believe that he could protect them. Another shot. Another man went down, and the remaining 3 advanced, their footsteps heavy and determined. Her father was out of ammunition. She saw him glance at the rifle, the realization hitting him in an instant. They were running out of time. Her father moved quickly, grabbing a nearby knife from the counter and positioning himself between the girl and the advancing men. His face was hard, his eyes filled with a mix of resolve and anger. He wasn't going to let them take her. He wasn't going to let them destroy everything they had fought for. One of the men lunged at him, but her father was faster. He sidestepped, the knife flashing through the air, and the man dropped to the ground with a gurgle, blood spilling from his side. The remaining 2 men hesitated for a moment, clearly reassessing their strategy. But it was too late. With one final move, her father lunged, grabbing the nearest man by the throat and slamming him into the wall. The man struggled, but her father's grip was unyielding, and with a final twist he brought the man to the ground, his lifeless body crumpling into the corner. The last man raised his weapon, his hands shaking, but her father was on him in an instant. He tackled the man to the ground, the rifle falling from his hands. There was a brief struggle, a flurry of punches and kicks, but in the end, her father's strength prevailed. He knocked the man out cold, his body slumping to the floor. Silence. For a moment, nothing moved. The girl lay on the floor, her eyes wide with fear, but also with something else, relief. Her father had done it. He had protected her. He walked toward her, his breath heavy, his body covered in sweat and blood, but his eyes were soft when he looked at her. He knelt down beside her, taking her hand in his. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she was safe. They were both safe. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. She felt the warmth of her father's protection. "It's over," he whispered. "We're going to be okay." The girl clung to him, her heart still racing, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the weight of the danger lift. They had survived, and no matter what came next, they had each other, and that, she realized, was all that truly mattered. The end.